Look at him. Just look. That man does not belong at my wedding. I don't care whose father he is. He said it out loud, not in a corner, not in a whisper. He said it standing near the entrance of the Whitfield Grand Venue on a Saturday afternoon in October, with the magnolia trees holding their last leaves and the entire wedding party within earshot. His voice carried the way voices do when a man has never once been told to lower them. Certain, unhurried, the kind of sentence that assumes agreement. The man he was pointing at stood maybe 30 feet away on the gravel walkway, near the iron gate that separated the venue's manicured lawn from the parking area beyond. He wore a pale blue button-down shirt, collar open, no tie, khaki trousers with a faint crease that had softened over a long drive, shoes that had been polished once, maybe last winter. He carried no jacket. He held a white envelope in one hand, an invitation it would turn out, printed on ivory cardstock with a gold foil seal, and a small paper bag in the other, the kind from a grocery store bakery, with a ribbon tied around the top. He had arrived by bus, not from a lack of options. He had simply decided that the November road construction on I-285 made the North Connector a poor choice at that hour, and that the MARTA Gold Line would get him there in roughly the same time, plus or minus the walk from the Dunwoody station. He had stood at the bus stop in his pale blue shirt with his grocery bag and his envelope, and he had looked at his watch once, noted he was 4 minutes early, and waited. His name was Otis Laine, and right now he was watching the man who planned to marry his daughter gesture in his direction, as though identifying a vehicle with an expired tag. If you have ever been dismissed before anyone knew your name, stay, because what happens at that gate in the next 3 hours is going to rearrange everything Derek Foss thought he understood about the world. Like this channel, if you want justice served cold, subscribe so you do not miss the moment the phone rings. Otis did not move. He watched. He folded the envelope once along its crease and tucked it into his shirt pocket. Then he looked at the gate, looked at the venue entrance, and began walking forward with the measured, unhurried pace of a man who has decided, without drama, that he is going inside. No one had told him he could not yet. That was about to change. The Whitfield Grand was the kind of venue that charged a venue coordination fee on top of the venue rental fee, and then added a separate line item for ambient lighting management, which in practice meant someone had replaced the standard overhead bulbs with warmer ones. The main hall had tall, arched windows overlooking a garden that was genuinely beautiful in summer and carefully managed now in October so that nothing appeared too bare. Cream linen tablecloths, round tables set for 8, gilt-edged charger plates, centerpieces involving white hydrangeas and eucalyptus, arranged just high enough to avoid blocking eye contact across the table. 211 guests had been invited. The seating chart had been finalized 3 weeks earlier, and it had been finalized by Claudette Foss, Derek's mother, who had a laminated copy in her handbag and a second laminated copy at the venue coordinator station, and who had personally approved every table assignment, every name card, and the precise placement of every centerpiece down to the inch. Otis had not been consulted about the seating chart. He had received a save-the-date card in January and a formal invitation in August, and he had RSVP'd by the deadline, mailing back the card in an envelope with a stamp, because his daughter had sent the kind of invitation that included a stamp. He had written his name, Otis Laine, +1, in the blank line provided, and he had circled the fish option for dinner. He had not brought a +1, he had come alone. The first person he encountered inside the gate was not Derek. It was a young man in a dark blazer with a laminated badge that read, Event Staff, clipped to his lapel pocket. The young man had a clipboard and the carefully practiced smile of someone who has been told to seem welcoming and is finding it harder than expected. Good afternoon, sir. Can I get your name for the list? Otis gave it. The young man ran a finger down the clipboard, found it near the bottom of the second page, alphabetical by last name, L section, and offered a nod that was more of a tick, a small forward motion of the head that confirmed his presence without quite celebrating it. "You're at table 14, the young man said. "That's toward the—" "I have table 7 on my invitation," Otis said. Not aggressively, factually, the way a person states a measurement. The young man looked at his clipboard again, then at Otis, then at his clipboard. "It looks like there may have been a late update to the seating, sir. Table 14 is a very nice table, near the east window." Otis looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Is there someone I can speak with about the list?" The young man with the clipboard looked grateful to have been given a task he could hand off. He said he would go find the coordinator and asked Otis to wait just a moment near the entry, gesturing toward a high-top table beside the door where a small tray of sparkling water had been arranged with lemon slices. Otis moved toward it. He set his grocery bag down carefully on the table. It contained a tin of handmade pecan pralines, his daughter's favorite since she was 9 years old, wrapped in a cellophane sleeve with a blue bow, and he stood there and looked at the room. He did not fidget. He did not check his phone. He looked at the room the way someone looks at a layout they are memorizing. The entry point and the 2 exits on the south wall, the service corridor behind the far left side of the stage, the emergency staircase marked by a green exit sign above a prop door, the positions of the venue staff in relation to the main flow of foot traffic. It was not anxiety, it was habit. The kind of habit that becomes so embedded it operates below the surface of conscious thought, like checking your mirrors before changing lanes. You do not decide to do it, you simply do. Across the room, near the bar that had not yet opened, Claudette Foss stood with a glass of still water and watched him. She was 61 years old, silver-haired, wearing a champagne-colored dress with 3/4 sleeves and a single strand of pearls that she had owned for 22 years. She had the posture of a woman who had attended a great many events at which the management of appearances was understood to be the primary task. She recognized Otis from a photograph. Dahlia had shown her one in the spring, at a brunch in Buckhead that Claudette had organized partly as a social courtesy and partly as a reconnaissance exercise. In the photograph, Otis had been wearing a sport coat. Today, there was no sport coat. She noted this the way she noted most things, without expression, efficiently, and with the full understanding that she would act on it later. She was not unkind, exactly. She was something more precise than unkind. She was strategic. And she had decided, somewhere between January and October, that the wedding she was hosting, her son's wedding, in a venue she had selected and a guest list she had largely curated, would represent a certain version of the world. Wealth adjacent, polished, the kind of event that looked good in the photographs that would circulate for years. Otis Laine, in his pale blue shirt and his grocery store bag, did not fit the version of the world she was hosting. She set her water glass down and began moving toward the entry. She did not reach him first. Crystal Foss, Derek's younger sister, appeared from the direction of the bridal preparation suite hallway, moving fast. She had a talent for moving fast in heels, the kind of skill developed over years of events that required her to be in 3 places at once. She was 33, sharp-featured, wearing her dark hair pulled back in a bridesmaid dress in the wrong shade of champagne, which had been the subject of a brief argument 3 weeks ago that she had technically lost but had not conceded. She had a phone in her hand, as she almost always did, and she had already sent 2 messages in the past 90 seconds. She pulled up near the young man with the clipboard, exchanged 4 quiet words with him, and glanced toward Otis at the high top. She did not approach him. Instead, she pivoted toward the venue coordinator station near the far wall, where a man in a gray blazer stood with a tablet, and she moved in that direction with the purposeful energy of someone who has decided to resolve a problem before it becomes visible. The venue coordinator's name was Jasper Wren. He was 45, trim, with the kind of precise grooming that suggested he spent the same amount of time on it every morning. He had worked Whitfield Grand Events for 11 years and had seen most varieties of interpersonal complexity that wealthy families generated on significant occasions. Crystal reached him, leaned in, and said something close to his ear. Jasper looked up from his tablet. His eyes moved briefly to Otis. Then he closed a folder on the table beside him and began walking over. Claudette arrived at the high top first by 3 seconds. "Mr. Laine." Her voice was warm, the kind of warm that has been practiced. "I'm Claudette, Derek's mother. We haven't formally met." "We haven't," Otis agreed. He offered his hand and she took it. "It's wonderful that you made it. Dahlia speaks of you often." A pause that was almost undetectable. "I wanted to make sure you knew there was a small adjustment to the seating, just to accommodate some of the business guests Derek needed near the front. Table 14 is really lovely, very good sightlines to the ceremony altar, and my invitation has table 7, Otis said again. Same tone, same register. He reached into his shirt pocket and produced the envelope, withdrew the invitation, and held it so she could see without handing it over. His thumb rested along the bottom edge. The gold foil of the embossed seal caught the light. He read it aloud quietly. Table 7, Seat 1, Father of the Bride. That's what it says, right here, in your own ink. Claudette's smile did not move. The warmth in it did. I understand the confusion. These things get updated last minute and not everyone receives the notice. Jasper can explain the, I'm not confused, Otis said. He said it gently. But I'd like to understand the reason. Jasper reached the high top at this point, tablet in hand, and introduced himself as the venue coordinator with the kind of crisp professionalism that suggested he had rehearsed this exact entrance. He explained, with genuine neutrality, that the seating chart in the venue's system showed Otis Laine at table 14, and that venue policy deferred to the most current chart on record. Otis looked at him. When was it updated? Jasper consulted his tablet. Thursday evening, 6:47 p.m. Otis nodded slowly. He folded his invitation and returned it to his pocket. He picked up his grocery bag. He said nothing further for a moment, and in that silence, which lasted perhaps 4 seconds, he turned his head once toward the garden visible through the tall arched windows, and once toward the entry corridor that led toward the bridal suite, as if calculating something. Then he said, All right, where is table 14? Jasper pointed. Otis thanked him, took his grocery bag, and walked in that direction without another word. Behind him, Claudette watched him go. Jasper glanced at her with the neutral expression of a professional who understands that his job is to manage logistics, not interpret them. Crystal, from across the room, watched Otis reach table 14, set his bag down on a seat, and sit. She sent a message on her phone. The message read, He sat down. What do you want me to do? The reply came back in 40 seconds. It read, Nothing yet. Let Derek handle it. Table 14 was in the northeast corner of the main hall, the last row before the service corridor entrance. It was not unpleasant. The sight lines to the altar were, as Claudette had said, adequate, but it was categorically not what the invitation said, and everyone in the room who understood wedding seating hierarchies, and at an event like this, most of them did, would understand what it meant for the father of the bride to be seated at the perimeter. Otis understood. He had understood before he sat down. He placed the bakery bag at the center of his table setting, adjusted it so the ribbon faced outward, and then sat with his hands folded on the tablecloth and waited. The room was filling. Guests arrived in the clusters that weddings generate, pairs, small groups, a few solo arrivals who moved with the practiced ease of people accustomed to events where they know no one. White-collar professionals, most of them, the kind of crowd that wore their networking impulses to social occasions without quite acknowledging it. He watched the room. He noted who greeted whom, which clusters formed and which avoided each other, where the power in the room was resting. Near the front, at table 1, Senator Floyd Harmon had taken his seat. He was 67, broad-shouldered in a well-cut charcoal suit, the kind of man who generates a small, gravitational pull in any room he enters. Beside him sat a woman Otis did not recognize, and across from them, two men in their 50s who had the look of lobbyists or venture partners, the kind of professional who always seems slightly more comfortable in the room than they should be. Derek Foss moved between tables near the front with the energy of a man who is performing the best day of his life and has rehearsed it carefully. He shook hands with a precision that suggested he had ranked the hands in order of importance before arriving. He laughed at the right moments. He kept one hand always available, never fully committed to a grip, so he could move on without appearing to hurry. He was doing well. He was good at this. He had not yet come near table 14. 40 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, Jasper Wren appeared again at Otis's table. He carried his tablet and wore the same neutral expression, though something in it was slightly more fixed than before, the expression of a man who has received new instructions and is about to deliver them. "Mr. Laine," he said, stopping beside the chair, "I apologize for the interruption. There's been an additional review of the guest credentials, and I need to ask a few clarifying questions." Otis looked up at him. "Go ahead. The venue requires that all guests in attendance have a verifiable RSVP on file with the event hosts. Given the seating discrepancy earlier, I just want to confirm, do you have your RSVP confirmation? A reference number, a confirmation email, anything of that kind?" The question was framed politely. It was, nonetheless, an accusation wearing the costume of administration. Otis looked at Jasper for a moment without responding. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and produced the invitation again. "The RSVP was returned by mail," he said. "The invitation provided a paper card, which I completed and mailed on August 19th. There's no digital confirmation because the process didn't generate one. Unfortunately, without a digital record, the process your host designed did not produce a digital record," Otis said. "That isn't a gap in my RSVP, that's a gap in the tracking system." Jasper made a note on his tablet. "I understand, I just need to document." "Document whatever you need to," Otis said. "While you're documenting, I'd also like you to note that this invitation," he held it up once more briefly, "specifies Table 7, Seat 1, under the name Otis Laine, with a role designation of Father of the Bride. It was issued by the event hosts. The seat reassignment was made Thursday at 6:47 p.m. without my knowledge or consent. I'd like that noted as well." Jasper typed. He was not a bad man. He was a man executing a task assigned to him by someone with the authority to assign tasks. He typed carefully, which was the best he could offer. At that moment, Crystal appeared beside him. She had her phone in hand, as always, but she held it loosely now, not texting, just present. She gave Otis the polite, remote smile of a woman who has decided she is not doing anything wrong. "Mr. Laine," she said, "I think there might just be a quick conversation needed between you and Derek. Just to clarify a few things before the ceremony, would you be open to stepping to the side hallway for a moment? It would only take—" "Is your brother available right now?" Otis asked. He's with the photographer at the moment, but he'll be—" "Then I'll wait here until he's available," Otis said. He said it the way someone might say they will wait for the next elevator. No drama, no announcement, simply the statement of a person who has decided on their plan and sees no reason to change it. Crystal looked at Jasper. Jasper looked at his tablet. Then Crystal's phone rang. She stepped away to take it. It was in this window, maybe 3 minutes of ambient noise, guests settling at tables, a string quartet warming up somewhere behind a draped partition, that Otis reached into the inner pocket of his shirt and retrieved something small. It was a business card, but he did not look at it. He held it between two fingers for a moment, as one might hold a card one is deciding whether to play, and then he placed it face down beside his charger plate. He folded his hands again. He waited. 2 tables away, A woman in a teal blazer with a reporter's instinct noticed him do this. She had a champagne flute in her hand and the casual, watchful posture of someone who has learned to observe without appearing to. Her name was Simone Daly. She wrote for the Atlanta Business Chronicle, had attended perhaps 40 events in this city in the past 2 years where power was the actual menu item. And she had, at a corporate governance summit in February, sat 3 rows behind a man named Otis Laine during a panel on capital allocation. She was not certain, at this moment, that this was the same man, but she had learned not to dismiss the feeling of certainty when it arrived. She kept her champagne flute up and kept watching. Derek Foss arrived at table 14 at 12 minutes before the ceremony. He did not come from the direction of the photographer. He came from the entry corridor, where he had been standing with Crystal for the past 4 minutes. He wore his wedding suit, a dark navy single-breasted jacket, white pocket square, boutonniere of white lily and eucalyptus, and he carried himself with the posture of a man who has decided that this interaction is something he will resolve and then forget. He pulled out the chair beside Otis and sat. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low, the kind of private conversation pose that is designed to signal reasonableness. "Otis," he said, "I want to be straight with you." "All right," Otis said. "This is my day, our day, Dahlia's and mine, and there's a certain image we're working with here. The guest list is a very specific mix of people. Business contacts, a senator, a lot of folks who matter to what I'm building, and I need everything today to look a certain way." He paused. "I'm not going to pretend I'm not saying what I'm saying. The way you came in, no jacket, no... You came on the bus, Otis. Someone told me you came on the bus. I need the people at this event to see Dahlia's family a certain way. And right now, you need them to not see me," Otis said. Derek did not flinch. "I need you to understand that appearances matter at these things, more than people like to admit." The phrase "people like to admit" landed where he meant it to. Otis heard it. He sat with it for a moment. Then he said calmly, "What procedure are you using to remove me from the event?" Derek blinked. The question had a different shape than he expected. He had anticipated, perhaps, emotion, offense, something he could redirect. "Procedure?" he said. "You said you need me gone," Otis said. "I'm asking what the formal basis is, because the invitation is valid. The RSVP is documented. My relationship to the event is," a brief pause, "documented. So if you're asking me to leave, I'd like to understand the documented reason." The word "documented," used twice, not threatening, precise. Derek looked at him for a moment, then he straightened up in the chair. "I'm asking you as the groom, as the man hosting this event. I'm asking you to understand that sometimes the right thing to do is recognize when your presence is complicating things for the people you care about." "I came to see my daughter married," Otis said. "Dahlia will understand." Otis looked at him. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger, not grief, something older and more controlled than either. He said nothing. He picked up the business card beside his charger plate and slid it into his shirt pocket without showing it. "I'd like to speak with Dahlia," he said. "She's preparing. Then I'll wait." The ceremony was 12 minutes away, and Derek Foss, sitting in a navy suit with a white pocket square and a boutonniere of white lily and eucalyptus, made a decision. He stood up. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Otis with the flat, resolved expression of a man who has decided the path forward and intends to walk it. He said, in a voice that carried just enough for the adjacent tables to catch the edge of it, "I don't know who you think you are, but this is my event, and I'm going to ask you to step outside until we can sort this out." The phrase, "until we can sort this out," was the part he believed gave him cover. It implied temporariness. It implied reasonableness. It implied this was a logistical matter rather than what it actually was, which was a man in a navy suit telling another man that his presence was an embarrassment. and doing so in a room full of people who were beginning, quietly, to pay attention. Otis stood. He picked up his grocery bag, the tin of pecan pralines, still wrapped with its blue bow. He held it for a moment, looking down at it. Then he set it on the table, face up, as if leaving it for someone. He walked toward the exit, not fast, not slow, the pace of a man covering ground. Outside the arched main doors, the October afternoon was cooling. The magnolia trees threw long shadows across the gravel. A parking valet was standing near the far gate, phone in hand. A catering truck idled at the service entrance to the left. Otis walked to the iron gate, which was the boundary of the venue's private grounds, and stopped. He stood with his hands at his sides. Behind him, through the tall, arched windows, he could see the lights inside the main hall, warm and amber, the guests settling into their seats, the string quartet beginning its first proper piece. He reached into his pocket. He did not take out the business card. He took out his phone and he typed something. A short message, 3 lines at most. He pressed send. He put the phone back in his pocket. Then he folded his hands in front of him, looked at the gate, and waited. The parking valet noticed him first. He was a young man of maybe 20, wearing a red vest, and he had the uncertain expression of someone who was not sure whether the man standing at the gate was waiting to be collected or waiting to cause a problem. He took 2 steps in Otis's direction, thought better of it, and went back to his phone. Otis stood at the gate for 7 minutes without moving. Inside, the ceremony began at 5:17 p.m. He could hear it faintly through the windows, the shift in the string quartet's key, the gentle rise and fall of the officiant's voice, carrying the particular cadences of formal ceremony. He could not make out the words. He thought about the fact that Dahlia had asked him 4 months ago in a phone call from her apartment in Midtown whether he was happy. Not whether he was proud, she knew he was proud, but whether he was happy. He had said he was. She had been quiet for a moment and then said, "You never say things like that unless you mean them, so I believe you." He had told her he was glad she believed him. She had said she loved him. He had said the same. He thought about that phone call and kept his hands folded in front of him. Inside, Claudette Foss watched the ceremony from her seat at table 1 and kept her face in the expression appropriate to the moment. She was good at this. She had attended enough significant events to understand that the right expression, held steadily, becomes invisible. Nobody questions what they cannot see moving. Crystal sat in the second row and checked her phone once, briefly, then put it face down. Senator Floyd Harmon watched the ceremony with the benign attention of a man who attends many gatherings and has learned to perform engagement without expending it. He had known Derek for 3 years, had attended 2 of his company's pitch events, and had a meeting in his calendar for the following Tuesday to discuss a logistics infrastructure bill that mattered to Derek's company. He was not, precisely, a friend of Derek's. He was a useful acquaintance whom Derek treated as a friend, which was a distinction Harmon was entirely aware of and unconcerned about, because it was the standard nature of his professional relationships. He had seen the man at the gate on his way to his seat. He had recognized, in the way people with finely calibrated social antennae do, that something was off in the room's composition. But he had made no inquiry and taken no action, because the calculation of risk and benefit had resolved quickly and without much deliberation. Whatever that situation was, it was Derek's situation, and Harmon's attendance at this event was a courtesy, not a commitment. The ceremony lasted 31 minutes. When the guests began filing out of the main hall to the cocktail garden, a covered outdoor space between the hall and the parking area, Otis was still at the gate. He had been joined at some point in the past 20 minutes by Simone Daly. She had come outside under the pretense of taking a call and had ended up near enough to Otis that avoiding him would have required a deliberate effort. She stopped beside him, looked at the magnolia trees, and said, "Mr. Laine." He turned to look at her. "Simone Daly, Atlanta Business Chronicle. I covered the Meridian Capital Governance Summit in February. You were on the panel." She said it straightforwardly, without the professional warmth that signals an interview is imminent. Just a statement, a placing of facts in the air between them. Otis looked at her for a moment. "I remember the summit," he said. "I wanted to make sure I had the right person. I didn't want to interrupt your—" She gestured briefly toward the venue. "I've been managed out of the event," Otis said. The word managed was precise and deliberate and contained exactly the register she had come to associate with people who chose their language carefully. Simone looked at him. "Would you like to comment on that?" "Not at this time," Otis said. She nodded. She wrote nothing. Her notebook was inside, but she was recording things in the way reporters do when they understand that the story is still forming. She would later write in the margins of a page in her reporter's notebook, "OL, gate, outside, composed, confirmed sighting, follow Caldwell line, TBD." She excused herself and went back inside. The cocktail garden filled. Guests accepted glasses of champagne from passing trays and formed the conversational clusters that cocktail hours generate. Derek moved through them with the energy of a man on his best day, which he believed this was. Dahlia stood beside him, radiant, laughing with a group of friends she had known since college, one hand resting lightly in the crook of Derek's arm. She did not know her father was outside the gate. Nobody had told her. This was not an accident. Crystal had managed the geometry of the afternoon carefully enough that Dahlia had gone from the bridal suite to the ceremony position without passing through the main hall. She had walked a prepared path, one that kept her insulated from the logistics her future husband had set in motion. This was, in its own way, the most deliberate act of the day. Claudette approached Otis 10 minutes into the cocktail hour. She came alone, no Jasper, no Crystal. She walked across the gravel to the gate and stood beside him and looked out at the parking area beyond, as if they were both simply observing the same view. "I want to apologize," she said. "Not for Derek's decision. He made his own decision and that's his right. But for the way it was handled. That was not graceful." "No," Otis agreed. "Dahlia is happy," Claudette said. "Whatever you think of Derek, she is genuinely happy today. That's worth something." "It's worth a great deal," Otis said. The ease with which he agreed seemed to unsettle her slightly. She had been prepared for resentment, which she could have navigated. This was harder to navigate. "There will be other occasions," she said. "Holidays, eventually grandchildren. There are ways to build a relationship with a son-in-law over time that don't require this kind of confrontation." "I didn't confront anyone," Otis said. Another pause. "No," she admitted, "you didn't." She looked at him. For the first time, something in her expression shifted. Not regret exactly, more like the faint, uncomfortable awareness that one has made a calculation that may have been based on incomplete information. She looked at the grocery bag he still held, the blue ribbon at the top. "What's in the bag?" she asked. "Pecan pralines. Dahlia's been requesting them since she was small." He paused. "I left the tin inside, on the table." Claudette said nothing. She looked at the gate. She turned and walked back toward the venue. Inside, at the far end of the cocktail garden, Derek was finishing a conversation with Senator Harmon, who had taken a glass of sparkling water and was listening to Derek outline the timeline of his company's planned expansion into Southeast logistics hubs. The senator nodded in the appropriate places. He had a particular skill, developed over years, of appearing deeply interested in things he was only moderately interested in, and he deployed it now with efficient courtesy. "The Tuesday meeting is still on," the senator said when Derek wound down. "I've had my people look at the infrastructure bill language. There's some room for discussion on the exemption thresholds." "That's encouraging to hear," Derek said. He meant it. The exemption thresholds in the current draft of the bill were the difference between his company's Southeast expansion being financially viable and it not being financially viable. The Tuesday meeting was, without overstating it, significant. Harmon gave him the politician's handshake, firm, brief, accompanied by brief eye contact, and excused himself to speak with someone else. Derek scanned the garden. He found Crystal near the bar and walked to her. "He's still out there?" he asked. "At the gate," she said. "He hasn't made a scene. He hasn't called anyone that I know of." "Good." Derek straightened his boutonniere unnecessarily. "If Dahlia asks—" "She hasn't asked," Crystal said. "She doesn't know." "Good," he said again. He picked up a glass of champagne from a passing tray. "After the reception starts, if he's still there, have Jasper ask him to move on. Politely. Venue policy on loitering." Crystal looked at her brother. "Venue policy on loitering. You heard me." She picked up her own glass. She said nothing more. The transition from cocktail hour to reception took 15 minutes. Guests filed back into the main hall. The string quartet gave way to a DJ setup. Tables filled. The room acquired the warm, slightly louder energy of a dinner reception in full motion. Jasper Wren appeared at the gate at 6:14 p.m. He had his tablet, as always, and he wore the expression of a man executing an instruction he found professionally distasteful, but had calculated was within his role to carry out. "Mr. Laine," he said, "I've been asked to let you know that the venue has a policy regarding extended presence in the entry area outside the event space. Given that you're no longer part of the active guest list—" "I was never removed from the guest list," Otis said. "I was moved to a different table and then asked to step outside. Those are two different things." Jasper opened his mouth and then closed it. "If there is a written venue policy regarding the area I'm standing in," Otis continued, "I'd appreciate a copy. If the policy exists in the venue's standard contract with the event hosts, I'd also appreciate the contract reference." Jasper looked at his tablet. He scrolled. He scrolled again. The look of a man whose tablet is not helping him. "I don't have the specific contract language available to me at this—" "Then I'll continue to wait," Otis said. Not combative, just clear. There was a pause. Jasper shifted his weight. He had, in 11 years of event coordination, encountered many versions of a difficult guest. There were the ones who yelled, which were easy. You called security and filed a report. There were the ones who cried, which were harder. You fetched water and spoke softly. There were the ones who threatened lawsuits, which were routine. You thanked them for their input and forwarded the matter to the venue's legal contact. But this man did none of those things. He stood at the gate and asked questions that required answers Jasper did not have, in a tone that made the absence of those answers feel like an institutional failure rather than his personal one. That was its own category. He was not sure his 11 years had given him a protocol for it. He said, "I'll need to consult with the event hosts." "That's fine," Otis said. "While you're doing that, for your documentation, my name is Otis Laine, Laine. I arrived at this event with a valid invitation, an RSVP submitted according to the method specified by the invitation, and a relationship to the event that is recorded on the invitation itself. I've been asked to leave the venue interior without a formal basis in writing, and I've complied with that request voluntarily. I am currently standing on the public side of the venue's property line. I'd appreciate your noting all of that." Jasper typed. He typed for longer than was strictly necessary, which meant he was either very thorough or he was using the typing as something to do while he gathered himself. He looked up. "I've noted it." "Thank you," Otis said. Jasper walked back toward the venue, and the careful, measured precision of his footsteps on the gravel said something about the mood he was carrying. Behind him, Otis reached into his pocket and looked at his phone. He had one message, received 6 minutes ago. He read it. He typed a short reply. He put the phone away. He reached Georgia OCGA Section 1361 in his memory without needing to look it up, the way one reaches a familiar route. The section governs breach of contract, and the relevant principle is that breach includes material interference with a party's legitimate expectation of performance. He was aware that the application here was not clean, A wedding invitation is not a commercial contract in the standard sense, and the venue's relationship was with the hosts, not with him. But the principle of documented expectation, systematically and deliberately undermined, was one he was comfortable placing in the record. He did not say any of this aloud. He filed it. That was the habit, not the habit of a man who had studied law, though he had taken 2 semesters of corporate law in an evening program at Emory in his late 30s. The habit of a man who had spent 23 years managing the kind of capital that punishes imprecision. He thought about what Derek had said, inside. The words people like to admit. He had heard that construction before. It was a social scalpel. It cut and then withdrew before anyone could point at the wound and say, "Look, something was cut there." He had been on the receiving end of that construction perhaps a dozen times in his career, in boardrooms, in conference calls, in quarterly reviews, and he had learned to treat it the way a navigator treats an error on an old map. Not as a truth about the terrain, but as a truth about the mapmaker. The evening was quieter now. From inside the hall, a low wash of music. The DJ had started, something understated, dinner music that would build into something louder after the first dance. He could hear the rise and fall of table conversation, the specific tone of 200 people at a meal, the occasional spike of laughter. He thought about the way Dahlia laughed, the way she laughed at things that weren't supposed to be funny, the way she had laughed at the Savannah waterfront when he had said the thing about knowing what you're worth. He had not meant it as funny. She had made it funny. That had always been one of her gifts, the ability to find the lightness in the weight of a thing without dismissing the weight. He hoped she was laughing right now. He hoped the champagne was cold and the food was good, and her dress was exactly what she had imagined it would be when she described it to him in a phone call last spring. She had described it for 12 minutes. He had listened to all 12 minutes. He remembered the fabric description in particular, something about a lace overlay and the way it caught light, because she had paused in the middle of it and said, "You're actually listening, aren't you?" And he had said, "Every word." She had gone quiet for a moment and then continued describing the dress. He hoped she was having the day she had described. Inside the hall, at 6:22 p.m., Derek Foss's phone buzzed in his jacket pocket during the first toast. He ignored it. It buzzed again at 6:28. He silenced it. At 6:31, during the salad course, it buzzed a third time, and the screen, angled toward the table, displayed a name. The name was Caldwell Capital, board line. Derek stared at it for 2 full seconds. Then he pressed the side button to silence it and placed the phone face down on the table. Beside him, Dahlia had turned to speak with a college friend 2 seats to her right and had not seen the screen. At table 1, Senator Floyd Harmon had. He was 6 feet away, and he had the peripheral acuity of a man who has spent 30 years in rooms where information crosses the air in ways that are not always intended. He saw the name on the screen. He saw Derek silence it. He looked, for a moment, at the far end of the room, as if recalibrating. Then he picked up his fork and returned to his salad. He was good at appearing undisturbed, but the calculation running behind his eyes had changed, quietly, in a direction that would matter later. Outside, Otis Laine stood at the gate as the evening dropped its temperature by 3 degrees. He had been outside for 1 hour and 17 minutes. He had moved twice, once to let a catering vehicle pass through the service entrance, and once to step slightly left when a valet retrieved a car. Otherwise, he had been still. He thought about Dahlia. He thought about the year she was 11, and they had driven to Savannah for a long weekend, just the 2 of them, and she had spent an entire afternoon at the waterfront asking questions he had answered one at a time with the patience he had needed to learn. He was not a natural patient man. He had worked at it, and she had at some point asked him, "What's the most important thing you know?" He had thought about it for a long time, long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. And then he had said, "Know exactly what you're worth, and let everybody else catch up." She had looked at him sideways and then laughed, and the laugh had taken him off guard because he hadn't meant it as funny, and then he laughed too, and the whole rest of the afternoon had been light. He thought about that afternoon. He thought about the pecan pralines on table 14 with the blue bow. He hoped someone was eating them. At 6:49 p.m., the gate behind him opened. It was Crystal. She came out without Jasper, without her phone, actually without her phone, which for Crystal was the equivalent of arriving without a limb. She walked to the gate and stood beside him and said nothing for a moment. "He doesn't know," she said finally. Otis looked at her. "About what you do," she said. "About the company. He did due diligence on your financial disclosures before he proposed. I know he did because I helped him run it. But what came back was, you're comfortable, not wealthy, a paid-off mortgage in Stone Mountain, modest retirement accounts, a business consulting role that wasn't, the way it was listed, it didn't." She stopped. She was working out how to say something she had not planned to say. "He doesn't know what he did today." Otis was quiet for a moment. "How do you know what he doesn't know?" Crystal looked at him. "Because if he knew, he wouldn't have done it this way. He's not. He's strategic. He wouldn't have burned something this big this carelessly if he understood what he was burning." Otis looked at the gate. "What makes you think something is burning?" She did not answer right away. Then she said, "Your phone sent something at 6:31, and at 6:33, my brother's phone rang from a number that made him look like he had touched a hot stove." She paused. "I notice things." Otis turned to look at her fully for the first time in this conversation. He looked at her the way someone looks at a person who has just said something that required them to set aside their position in a conflict that benefited them. And he held that look for a moment. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "I didn't tell you anything," Crystal said. She walked back inside. The door closed behind her. The gate latch clicked. Otis stood at the iron gate in the cooling October evening, one hand resting on the top rail, and he looked at the venue's amber windows with the expression of a man who has been here before. Not here at this gate, this venue, this particular evening, but here at this juncture, the one where everything that was true has been temporarily obscured by everything that appears to be true. And the distance between those two things is about to close rapidly and without a great deal of mercy for anyone who bet on appearance. He checked his watch. 6:51 p.m. He had perhaps 30 minutes before the situation inside that hall changed in a way that no amount of table seating adjustments, laminated charts, or venue policy citations was going to manage. He had known this since 6:14. He had stood at this gate because standing at this gate was the correct thing to do. Not for strategy, not for leverage, because Dahlia was inside that hall, and he was her father, and standing at the gate in the cooling October evening was the nearest he could be to the room where she was spending what she believed was the best day of her life. He was going to let her have that for as long as he could, and then Ezra Polk was going to walk through that door. At 7:03 p.m., Derek came outside. He came without Crystal, without Jasper, without anyone. He had left his phone on the table, intentionally or because it had rung 3 more times in the past 20 minutes, and he had stopped wanting to see the screen. He walked across the gravel in his navy suit with the boutonniere slightly wilted now, the white lily softening at its edges, and he stopped at the gate with his arms at his sides and looked at Otis. "You're still here," he said. "Yes," Otis said. Derek looked at the parking area beyond the gate. He looked at the venue windows. He had the expression of a man who has committed to a course of action and is now, up close to it, finding it less comfortable than the distance at which he planned it. "I want you to understand," Derek said, "that I don't have anything against you personally. This isn't personal." "I know," Otis said. The agreement again seemed to remove something Derek had been leaning on. He shifted his weight. "I need you to move on," Derek said. "I need you to not be here." "I'm on a public sidewalk," Otis said. He said it matter-of-factly. "The iron gate is the venue's property line. I'm outside of it. Derek stepped forward and put his hand on the gate. He pushed it open. It swung inward, and then stepped through it so that he was now on the same side as Otis. He was taller than Otis by 2 inches and broader in the shoulder, and he used both of these facts in the way he positioned himself. Close, slightly forward. "I'm asking you one more time," Derek said, "to leave." Otis looked at him. He stood his ground, not aggressively, not rigidly, simply in the manner of a person who has decided where they are standing and has no reason to relocate. "Touch me," Otis said quietly, "and we will have a different kind of conversation." He did not raise his voice. He did not move. He held Derek's gaze without any visible effort. Derek's hand was at his side. The impulse he had had, some version of a grip, a steering force, the physical assertion of authority that he had exercised in other contexts when he wanted to close a situation, did not complete itself. Something in Otis's stillness made the impulse dissolve before it became action. Not fear exactly, something more precise than fear. The recognition that the man in front of him was not going to respond to this the way people normally responded to this. Derek stepped back. He stood outside the gate in the parking area, looking at Otis. For the first time in this encounter, for possibly the first time today, he appeared uncertain. His phone was inside on the table. It was ringing again. He did not know this, but the parking valet 20 feet away, who had been watching this entire exchange with the covert attention of someone who has front row seats to something significant, could see the light through the window of the main hall where Derek's table was, and could see the table vibrating faintly, and could see the number on the screen. Caldwell Capital, board line. Derek straightened his wilted boutonniere. He said nothing. He walked back through the gate, latched it, and went inside. Otis watched him go. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and took out his phone and looked at a message that had arrived at 6:58 p.m. It read, "I'm in the parking lot, 40 minutes out. Do you want me to come in?" Otis typed back 3 words. The 3 words were, "Yes, come in." He put the phone away. He turned back to face the gate, and he waited in the cooling October evening, while inside the hall the last threads of the world Derek Foss had built this afternoon began, quietly and without any drama at all, to unravel. Something was coming, and it was dressed in a suit, carrying a briefcase, and its name was Ezra Polk. Ezra Polk drove a gray 4-door sedan with one small dent above the rear left wheel arch and a Caldwell Capital Group parking permit hanging from the rearview mirror. He drove it the way he drove everything, without urgency, without performance, with the settled competence of a man who has made his peace with the fact that arriving correctly matters more than arriving fast. He had been in practice as general counsel for 19 years. He had handled 2 federal arbitrations, a hostile takeover dispute that lasted 14 months, and a securities class action that had required him to read approximately 11,000 documents in a single calendar year. A Saturday evening drive from Midtown Atlanta to the Whitfield Grand in Dunwoody was not, by any standard of his professional history, a demanding assignment. He found the parking area easily. He noted the catering truck at the service entrance, the valet station near the main gate, and the man standing at the iron fence, pale blue shirt, hands folded, looking at nothing in particular, with the focus of someone who is paying very close attention to everything. He pulled into a visitor space, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment. Then he opened his door, retrieved a black leather briefcase from the back seat, and walked toward the gate. Otis heard the footsteps on the gravel before he turned. Ezra stopped beside him. He was 50 years old, lean, with the kind of measured face that had learned to withhold its reactions as a professional discipline. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie, his collar button open in the same manner as Otis's. Not by coincidence exactly, but by the shared habit of men who know that the moment for formal performance has not yet arrived. "Mr. Laine," he said. "Ezra," Otis said. They did not shake hands. They had worked together for 11 years, and had long ago moved past the handshake as a greeting. Ezra looked at the venue. He looked at the gate. He looked at the amber windows where the reception was running its evening course, the faint bass line of the DJ audible through the glass. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. "About 2 hours," Otis said. Ezra absorbed this. "And Dahlia doesn't know?" "Not yet." "All right," Ezra set his briefcase down briefly, rolled his neck once, picked it back up. "Have you eaten?" "No. There's a decent place 2 blocks past the MARTA station. We can go after." He paused. "Do you want to go in now, or do you want me to go in first?" Otis considered this. He looked at the gate. Behind the glass, someone had found a song the crowd liked. The energy in the room had shifted just slightly, upward. The kind of collective lift that happens when a DJ reads the room correctly. "I'll go in with you," Otis said. Ezra nodded. He lifted the gate latch, pushed it open, and held it. Otis walked through, and the two of them crossed the gravel toward the venue entrance. One man in a pale blue shirt with a tin of pecan pralines waiting on a table inside, and one man with a black leather briefcase and 19 years of documentation behind him. And they walked to the arched doors of the Whitfield Grand without asking anyone's permission. The room was in full reception mode. The dinner plates had been cleared from most tables. A few guests were on the dance floor near the DJ setup. Others remained seated with dessert and wine. The centerpieces had shed a few eucalyptus leaves since the afternoon. The lighting had shifted warmer, the kind of shift that venues make after 9 p.m. when the mood is expected to be social rather than ceremonial. Nobody, in the first 30 seconds, noticed them walk in. The room had reached the stage of a reception where attention was distributed rather than focused, and 2 men entering through the main door were simply 2 men entering through the main door. Jasper Wren noticed them first. He was near the service station on the left wall, reviewing something on his tablet, and he looked up with the automatic attention of a man whose job requires him to monitor arrivals. He recognized Otis. He saw the briefcase. He straightened slightly, the way people do when they register that a situation they thought was resolved has resumed in a different form. He did not immediately approach. He typed something on his tablet. He was buying time. Crystal saw them from the dance floor. She had been talking to a college friend of Dahlia's, half present in the conversation, and when she turned and saw Otis moving across the room with a man she did not recognize, but whose briefcase and posture communicated something that made her pulse shift, she excused herself. She moved toward the head table with the speed of someone who has realized that the thing she was asked to manage has moved beyond managing. Senator Floyd Harmon saw Otis from table 1 and recognized him with a small adjustment of expression that happens when a man realizes he has already made a mistake and must now decide how to respond to it. He picked up his wine glass and turned slightly in his chair, a fractional movement that positioned him to watch without appearing to. Derek was on the dance floor. He had, at some point in the past 30 minutes, decided that the matter of Otis Laine was resolved. The man had left, or at least was outside and not interfering, and he had released himself into the evening. He danced with Dahlia, a slow song, her head tipped against his shoulder, her dress exactly as she had described it on the phone, the lace overlay catching the amber light. He had his eyes half closed. He looked, in this moment, like a man who believed his life was going according to plan. Otis stopped at the edge of the dance floor and watched his daughter for 3 seconds. He did not go to her. He let her have the dance. He turned away and walked with Ezra toward a space near the far end of the room. Neutral territory. Not a table claimed by any guest cluster. A section of open floor near the draped partition that concealed the service corridor. Ezra set his briefcase on a high-top table near the wall and opened it. Crystal arrived. She positioned herself between Ezra and the room with the automatic placement of someone trying to contain a situation before it spreads. "You can't be in here," she said to Otis. Then, to Ezra, the question she had to ask. "Who are you?" "Ezra Polk," he said. "General Counsel, Caldwell Capital Group." He produced a business card and held it toward her. She took it. She looked at it. Something in her face changed. Not dramatically. The change was internal. A rapid recalculation that she was too disciplined to show fully. But her eyes moved from the card to Ezra's briefcase to Otis. And in that sequence was the compressed understanding of a woman who had run due diligence on Otis Laine 6 months ago and had found a consulting role, a paid-off mortgage, and what appeared to be a comfortable private income with no traceable institutional affiliation. She had found exactly what she was supposed to find, because Otis Laine had spent 23 years in a role that valued discretion above all things, and he had built his public financial profile accordingly. Caldwell Capital Group was not a name she had encountered in that search. It was a name she recognized from other contexts, from the Atlanta Business Chronicle, from the kind of deal announcements that ran in the financial pages of national publications, from the term sheet that Derek had been negotiating for the past 8 months, the one that represented the difference between his company's Southeast expansion being viable and not being viable, the one that had generated the conversations with Senator Harmon about infrastructure bill exemption thresholds, the one that was the reason Derek had needed this wedding to look a certain way. She looked at Otis. She looked at the business card in her hand. She said nothing. "I'd like to speak with Derek," Ezra said. His voice was level, professional, the voice of a man who is not there to make things worse, but is prepared to make them accurate. "I can do that quietly, at the edge of the room, or I can do it at the table." His choice. Crystal looked toward the dance floor. The song was ending. Dahlia and Derek were separating, laughing at something, turning to accept a flute of champagne from a passing server. "Give me a minute," Crystal said. She walked toward her brother. Otis watched her go. He looked at the tin of pecan pralines still sitting on table 14, at the far corner of the room where he had left it 2.5 hours ago. The blue bow was still tied. Nobody had touched it. Simone Daly had been near the bar when Otis walked in, and she had seen it, seen him, and seen the man with the briefcase, and made the connection between the name on the business card she had glimpsed from 12 feet away and the story she had been building in the margins of her notebook since February. She did not rush toward them. She was a good reporter, which meant she understood that the distance between her and the event was, for the moment, more valuable than proximity. She refilled her water glass and positioned herself with a clear sightline. Crystal reached Derek at the edge of the dance floor. She leaned in. She said something close to his ear. She held the business card at an angle where he could read it. He went very still. His stillness was not the stillness of Otis, that deliberate, rooted calm. His was the stillness of a man whose body has stopped operating on automatic because the information it has just received requires it to reboot. He looked at the card. He looked at Crystal. He looked across the room toward the high-top table near the draped partition where Ezra Polk stood with his briefcase open and his hands folded in front of him, and where Otis Laine stood beside him in a pale blue shirt, watching. Derek said something to Crystal that she did not respond to. He walked toward the high-top table. He came alone. No Claudette, no Senator Harmon, no Jasper with his tablet. He came across the room with the slow, careful pace of a man crossing ground he is not sure will hold his weight. He stopped at the table. He looked at Ezra. He looked at Otis. He looked at the briefcase. "Derek," Otis said. He said his name the way one acknowledges the arrival of a long-anticipated fact. Derek looked at him. Something was moving behind his eyes. Not yet understanding, but the approach of it, the dread of the approach. Ezra spoke. He spoke quietly, in the register of a man conducting business, not theater. "Mr. Foss, my name is Ezra Polk. I'm general counsel for Caldwell Capital Group. I'm also Mr. Laine's colleague of 11 years. I'm here because several attempts to reach you by phone this evening were unanswered, and because the matter I need to discuss with you has a time component that makes it appropriate to address tonight rather than Monday." Derek said, "What matter?" It was not quite a question. It was the sentence of a man who already knows the shape of the answer and is asking only because the protocol of the situation requires him to ask. Ezra reached into his briefcase and produced a document. 12 pages, paper clipped at the corner, printed on Caldwell capital letterhead with a gray watermark running diagonally across each page that read, "Draft, for review." He set it on the table between them. "This is the current draft of the investment agreement between Caldwell Capital Group and Foss Logistics Solutions," Ezra said. $47 million, structured as a Series B preferred equity instrument, with a board seat and 3 milestone-based tranches. You have been in negotiation on this agreement for 8 months. Mr. Laine is the signatory authority on behalf of Caldwell Capital. He has approval rights on the final term sheet, the investment committee recommendation, and the board resolution. He paused. He is the chief financial officer of Caldwell Capital Group. The room continued around them. The DJ was playing something with a beat. Someone was laughing loudly 2 tables over. The eucalyptus in the centerpieces had shed another few leaves. Derek looked at the document. He looked at Otis. He looked at the document again. He said at low volume, "You're the CFO." "Yes," Otis said. Derek was quiet for a long moment. The color in his face had shifted, not to pale exactly, but to a kind of flat, drained register. The face of a man whose internal systems are all running at once, and none of them are winning. "You didn't," he stopped. "When you came today, you didn't say anything. You didn't ask," Otis said. The simplicity of it was devastating. Not because it was cruel, because it was precise. In the entire afternoon, from the moment Derek had gestured across the gravel walkway and said, "That man does not belong at my wedding," through Claudette's polished redirection and Jasper's procedural maneuvers and Crystal's careful management of the room, through the seat reassignment and the RSVP challenge, and the gate and the boutonniere and the physical assertion at the iron fence. In all of it, nobody had asked. Nobody had said, "Who are you?" Nobody had treated the question as relevant. They had looked at a pale blue shirt and a grocery bag and a bus ride and had assembled their answer from those materials without asking the source. Ezra let the silence sit for exactly the right amount of time. Then he reached back into the briefcase. He produced a second document. This one was a single page. A letter, formal, dated that afternoon, 6:32 p.m., on Caldwell Capital Group letterhead with a wet signature at the bottom. "This is a letter of intent withdrawal," Ezra said, "effective as of the date and time-stamped. It cites per Section 11 of the Standard Investment Committee Protocol, a material change in the relationship between the parties that creates an irreconcilable conflict of interest for the investing entity." He paused. "The material change is what happened today." Derek looked at the letter. He read it. He read it again. "This is the 47 million, he said. His voice was flat, stripped of everything except the arithmetic. "This is the 47 million, Ezra confirmed. In the way of all significant moments, the room continued operating around this one, as if nothing had shifted. The DJ cued another song. A server moved through with a tray of dessert bites. Claudette Foss, who had been watching from across the room with the careful attention she brought to everything, made her way between tables in the particular direction of her son. She moved unhurriedly, not wanting to advertise her approach, but she moved. Dahlia was still at the far end of the room, near the head table, talking with 2 of her bridesmaids, a glass of champagne in her hand, her dress catching the light. She had not yet seen Otis. The room was full, and the distance was enough, and nobody had told her. Derek looked at Otis. He had the expression of a man who is trying to find the version of this situation that can be recovered and coming up empty. He tried anyway, because a man like Derek Foss does not stop trying until the math has proven itself beyond negotiation. "We can still talk Monday," he said. "Whatever happened today, that's separate. Business is separate. We were close on the term sheet, the exemption structure, the board seat. All of that was essentially, Derek, Otis said. Derek stopped. I came today to watch my daughter get married, Otis said. His voice was the same as it had been all evening, even, unforced, carrying no extra weight. I brought her a tin of pralines because she's been asking for them since March, and I kept forgetting to mail them. I took the bus because the road construction on I-285 made the drive impractical. I wore what I wore because it was comfortable, and I was not performing for anyone. He looked at Derek steadily. You made a decision about me in the first 30 seconds. You were consistent about it all afternoon. That decision is the business. He paused. What you do with it from here is up to you. Claudette arrived at the table. She looked at the document. She looked at Ezra's briefcase. She looked at the letter of intent withdrawal, and in the fraction of a second that it took her to read, Caldwell Capital Group, at the top of the letterhead, and absorb the number in the body of the letter, her face performed a very small, very controlled collapse, and then reassembled. It took perhaps 2 seconds. Most people in the room, had they been watching, would not have noticed. Otis noticed. She said nothing, which was its own kind of statement. Simone Daly, who had moved to a position 3 tables away, with her notebook now in her hand, wrote 4 words. She would not publish anything tonight. But she wrote the 4 words because she had learned that accuracy requires the moment of writing as close to the moment of event as possible. The 4 words were, Laine, CFO, Caldwell, confirmed. Jasper Wren, near the service station, watched the cluster at the high-top table and made the calculation that his role in the evening's events had likely come to its natural conclusion. He typed a note in his tablet, closed the cover, and set it down. Senator Floyd Harmon had left table 1. He had, with the deliberate ease of a man who is practiced in strategic exits, moved to the bar, ordered a sparkling water, and positioned himself near a group of guests he recognized from Atlanta's nonprofit community, where conversation would require his full attention and justify the fact that he was facing away from the rest of the room. He was very good at not being where things were happening. It was one of the skills his career had most thoroughly refined. The Tuesday meeting with Derek was in his calendar. He was already composing, in the part of his mind that ran parallel to his surface attention, the language of a rescheduling request that would neither burn the connection nor commit him to a conversation he no longer wished to have. At the high-top table, Derek was looking at the floor, not in shame precisely, in the way a man looks when he is computing whether the ground beneath him will hold. Ezra had reclipped the documents and returned them to the briefcase with the systematic care of a man who leaves things orderly. The briefcase was latched. The transaction was, in the language Ezra would use in a follow-up letter on Monday, concluded pending formal notification. Crystal had come to stand beside her brother at some point in the preceding minutes. She stood slightly back, not touching him, watching. She had the expression of someone who has watched a thing they could not prevent happen anyway. Then the music changed. It changed to a slower song, something warm, minor key, the kind of piece that signals to a room that the evening is beginning to wind toward its close. And with the change in music, the room's motion changed. People began returning to tables. Couples on the dance floor slowed and held each other. The energy shifted from outward to inward. Dahlia turned from the group she had been talking with and looked across the room. She saw her father. She stood very still for a moment. Then she looked around, at Derek, at Crystal, at the high-top table near the partition, and the sequence of what she was seeing, the geography of it, began to assemble into a picture. She walked toward Otis. She walked with the directness of a woman who has decided that whatever she is about to learn, she wants to learn it from the source and not from the edges. She stopped in front of him. She looked at him. She looked at Derek. She looked at Ezra's briefcase, which meant nothing to her by itself, and then at Ezra, who she did not recognize. She looked back at her father. "How long have you been here?" she asked him. Since about 4 o'clock, he said. She absorbed this. And right now, she stopped. What is right now? It's mostly finished, Otis said. She looked at Derek. She said, quietly and with a precision that did not require volume to carry, what did you do? It was not directed at Otis. It was directed at her husband, the man she had just danced with, the man who in 31 minutes of ceremony that afternoon had made the promises that people make when they believe they mean them. Derek looked at her. He opened his mouth. He found that the version of this that he could explain without making it worse did not exist, and that the version he could explain at all would require a starting point that was also its own condemnation. He said, there was a situation with the guest list. He's my father, Dahlia said. The room had not gone quiet. The music continued. The conversations at surrounding tables continued. But in the small radius of the high-top table, the 4 words landed with the finality of a document stamped and filed. Claudette put a hand on Derek's arm. He did not look at her. Dahlia looked at Otis. She looked at him the way she had looked at him on the Savannah waterfront when he said something that landed heavier than he intended. She said in a lower voice, one that was just for him, "You stayed." "Of course I stayed," Otis said. She nodded once, slowly. Then she reached past him and picked up the tin of pecan pralines from table 14, still wrapped with its blue bow, and she held it in both hands for a moment. She looked at it. She looked at him. "You left these," she said. "I left them for you," he said. She held the tin and did not say anything else for a moment. What crossed her face in that silence was not simple. It was the compressed emotion of a woman who has, in a single evening, understood something new about her father, something new about her husband, and something new about the gap between the two. It was too much for a single expression, and so it moved through several in quick succession, and then settled into something quiet and resolved. The expression of a person who has made a decision and is at peace with it. She turned to Derek. "I want to talk to him alone," she said. "My father. Alone." Derek looked at her for a long moment. He looked at Otis. He looked at Ezra's briefcase, as if the briefcase might offer a way out of the sentence he was standing inside. It did not. He nodded and stepped back. With that step back, the geography of the high-top table rearranged itself entirely. Claudette withdrew with the controlled grace of someone who understands that a scene has ended and a new one has begun. Not graciously, but efficiently, which was its own form of grace. Crystal watched her brother and said nothing. She had nothing to add. She had understood the shape of this evening at some point before the withdrawal letter arrived, and she had been carrying that understanding alone for the past 40 minutes. Ezra picked up his briefcase and moved 2 steps to the left. Not far, close enough if needed, far enough to be out of it. Otis and Dahlia stood at the high-pop table at the edge of the Whitfield Grand Reception Hall, and the room continued around them, and the music played, and she held the tin of pralines in both hands and did not cry, because she was her father's daughter, and that was one of the things it meant. What she said first was, "Are you okay?" Not a question about the business, not a question about Derek, a question about him, standing in a pale blue shirt at the end of an evening that had required him to be composed in ways that most people would have found impossible. And she wanted to know, before anything else, whether he was okay. He looked at her. He said, "I'm all right." She studied his face the way she had always studied his face, since she was a child trying to determine the difference between all right and actually all right. She found what she was looking for. Not perfect, not untouched, but genuine. He meant it. "Okay," she said. She exhaled. She untied the blue bow from the tin, slowly, and held the ribbon for a moment before setting it on the table. She said, "Tell me what happened." He told her. He told it without editorializing. Not the version that made Derek monstrous and himself saintly. Not the compressed version that left out the parts that were uncomfortable, but the version that was accurate. He told her about the arrival, the seating chart, Claudette's managed redirection, Jasper's procedural maneuvers, Crystal's whisper campaign, Derek at the gate. He told it the way he wrote investment memos, in sequence, with the relevant facts, without ornament. She listened. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He said you didn't belong here," she said. "He said that, yes." She looked at the room, at the 209 guests, the DJ, the warming centerpieces, the venue that her mother-in-law had selected and arranged, and seating charted with laminated precision. She looked at all of it. Then she said, "He doesn't get to decide that." Otis said nothing, which was all the agreement she needed. What they said to each other was private. The narrator was not in that conversation. What came out of it, 30 minutes later, was visible. Dahlia walked back to Derek with the specific posture of a woman who has made up her mind. She did not say what she had decided in front of anyone, but she took off her heels and carried them in one hand, and she picked up her bag from the head table, and she walked with Otis toward the main door of the Whitfield Grand at 7:41 p.m., while the reception was still nominally ongoing, while the DJ was playing something the remaining dancers liked, while the eucalyptus centerpieces had shed the last of their stray leaves onto the cream linen tablecloths. She did not run. She did not make a scene. She walked out beside her father the way she had always walked beside him, half a step behind and to his right, a childhood geometry that had never entirely left her, and the doors of the Whitfield Grand closed behind them. Nobody stopped them. Not Derek, who stood at the edge of the dance floor watching and said nothing. His boutonniere entirely wilted now, the white lily gone soft. Not Claudette, who was at table 1 speaking with Senator Harmon in a low, urgent tone and stopped speaking when she saw them leave. Not Crystal, who had been standing near the bar with both arms crossed, watching her brother, and who, when she saw the doors close, turned her back to the room and looked at the bar instead. Outside, the October evening had gone properly cold. The magnolia trees had stopped catching light. The gravel was damp from a half hour of thin mist that had come and gone. Ezra was already at his car, keys in hand, giving them their space with the professionalism of a man who knows when his part of a thing is done. Dahlia and Otis stood outside the iron gate, the same gate where he had stood for 2 hours in the cooling afternoon, and the venue's amber light was behind them now, and ahead of them was the parking area and the dark Georgia sky. She said, "You never told me." "About the job?" he said. "About any of it, all these years. You just let me think you were—" She stopped. She was not angry. She was trying to understand the shape of a thing she had thought she already knew. "You knew what you needed to know," he said. "You knew I was fine. I was always fine. But you didn't have to be fine alone," she said. "You could have—" "The job requires discretion," he said. "I didn't keep it from you to hide something. I kept it because the work requires it, and because—" He paused. He looked at the gate. "You've been making your own way for a long time, Dahlia. You didn't need your father's title to do that. You never did. I didn't want to put it between us." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He would have treated you differently." "Yes," Otis said. "And you wanted to know which one he was," she said. He said nothing, which was, in its own way, an answer. She looked at the tin of pralines in her hands. She lifted the cellophane edge carefully and opened the tin. The pralines were the ones from the place on Marietta Street, the small batch bakery that made them with dark sugar and Georgia pecans and just enough salt to make the sweetness complicated. She ate one. She held the tin out toward him. He took one. They stood outside the iron gate of the Whitfield Grand in the cold October evening, eating pralines in the dark, and for a little while neither of them said anything at all. Inside, the reception continued, as receptions do, because the music was paid for through 10 p.m. and the bar was open, and 209 guests did not stop having an evening because the two people most central to its meaning had walked out the front door. Senator Floyd Harmon finished his sparkling water, shook hands with the three people nearest him, and left at 8:15 p.m. He told his aide in the car that the Tuesday meeting with Foss Logistics needed to be rescheduled. He did not say why. The aide made a note in the calendar. The aide had learned not to ask. Derek did not dance again after Dahlia left. He sat at the head table with his jacket off and his phone in his hand, scrolling through the missed calls from the Caldwell Capital board line. There were 6 of them, spanning from 6:14 to 7:11 p.m. He did not call back. There was nothing to say that the formal withdrawal letter did not already say more precisely. Claudette sat beside him for a while, in silence. She was a woman who had managed many things in her life, and she managed this one the way she managed the others, by assessing what could still be controlled and directing her attention there. But the assessment in this case kept returning to the same conclusion. Not much. The $47 million was gone. The senator was gone. Dahlia was gone. What remained was the music and the guests and the cream linen tablecloths and the emptied champagne flutes and the centerpieces, those perfect white hydrangeas and eucalyptus arrangements, slowly losing their shape in the amber light. She picked up a stray eucalyptus leaf from the tablecloth and held it between 2 fingers. She put it down. She did not say anything to Derek for a long time. When she did speak, she said only, "We'll talk Monday." He nodded. He was still looking at his phone. Crystal left at 8:45 p.m. On her way out, she passed table 14. The pecan pralines were gone. Dahlia had taken the tin. But the cellophane wrapper with the blue bow was still there on the tablecloth, slightly crushed where someone had moved it aside to clear the place setting. Crystal picked it up. She stood there for a moment, holding a blue ribbon and a square of cellophane, the remnant of something brought with care to a room that had tried to erase the person carrying it. She put it in her bag. She left. Simone Daly filed her notebook in her bag at 9:05 p.m. She had 3 pages of notes and the confirmed understanding of a story she would need to verify carefully before publishing, which meant phone calls on Monday, document requests, and the particular patience that distinguishes reporting from rumor. She had, on her way out, stopped near Jasper Wren and asked him, in the casual tone of someone making conversation at the end of an event, whether the venue coordinator role gave him access to the guest documentation for the evening. He had said yes, guardedly. She had given him her card. He had taken it without committing to anything, which she noted as a yes that would arrive on its own schedule. She drove back toward Midtown on I-285, which was, by 9 in the evening, entirely clear of construction delays. In the days that followed, things moved at the speed that real things move, which is slower than the imagination and faster than the participants would prefer. On Monday, Ezra Polk sent the formal letter of withdrawal by certified mail and electronic filing. The letter cited, per Caldwell Capital Group's Standard Investment Committee protocol, a material conflict arising from an irreconcilable breach of conduct between a principal agent of the investing entity and the management of the investee company. It was 14 paragraphs. It did not use emotional language. It did not need to. Derek Foss received the letter at 11:32 a.m. His attorney called at noon. The attorney, whose name was Marcus Greer, had been handling Foss Logistics' legal affairs for 4 years and had been present in spirit, if not in person, at approximately 30 versions of this situation. The situation where a client has done something that cannot be undone, and the question is now, what can be managed? He was good at managed. He was less certain on this call that managed was available. The withdrawal is clean, Greer told Derek. Their grounds are defensible. Unless you can demonstrate that the conduct in question was unrelated to the business relationship, and given that the conduct involved a Caldwell principal in a context where the business relationship was material background, I don't think we have a strong argument for breach of their duty to complete. Derek was quiet on the phone. The equity gap is significant, Greer continued. We'd need to restart the capital raise. Given the current rate environment, and given that Caldwell will likely have filed the withdrawal with their institutional partners, there could be secondary signaling effects. Other funds may inquire before committing. Derek said, "What are my options?" Greer gave him his options. They were not bad options, in the sense that they were real and executable, and some of them would probably work. They were not good options, in the sense that any of them being necessary was entirely avoidable, and none of them led back to where he had been on Friday. $47 million does not vanish loudly. It vanishes in the specific silence of a line item removed from a spreadsheet, a calendar event deleted, a conversation that no longer needs to happen. Derek Foss felt that silence in the days that followed, with the precision of a man who has spent 8 months listening to his own ambitions, and now hears where that sound used to be, nothing. He did not sleep well that week. He lay in the apartment. Dahlia was in Midtown, the situation between them carrying the weight of something not yet named. And he looked at the ceiling and ran the tape of Saturday evening over and over, looking for the moment he could have chosen differently. He found it easily. He found it in the first 30 seconds, standing near the entrance of the Whitfield Grand, with the magnolia trees holding their last leaves, pointing at a man in a pale blue shirt and saying, with absolute confidence, "That man does not belong at my wedding." He had been so certain. That was the part that stayed with him. Not that he had been wrong, but that he had been wrong with such total, uncomplicated certainty. The kind of certainty that doesn't pause to ask questions because it already knows the answer. He had looked at Otis Laine, the bus, the shirt, the grocery bag, the shoes polished last winter, and he had assembled a complete picture from those materials and acted on it. And the picture had been so wrong that the wrongness of it had a kind of architectural scale that impressed him despite everything. He did not call Otis. He thought about it twice and recognized both times that the call he wanted to make, the one that led somewhere functional, required something from him that he did not yet have. He was not sure what that something was. He told himself it was time. He suspected it might be more than that. The article Simone Daly published ran 11 days after the wedding in the Atlanta Business Chronicle's digital edition under the headline, "Caldwell Capital Withdraws from Foss Logistics Deal. Sources Cite Relationship Conflict." It was 2,000 words. It cited 3 sources familiar with the situation, all unnamed. It described the withdrawal in the language of business journalism, terms, structure, timeline, and made no mention of a wedding, a gate, a pale blue shirt, or a tin of pecan pralines. Those details were not in the article. They did not need to be. What the article communicated, between its careful sentences, was understood immediately and completely by every person in Atlanta's business and investment community who read it. A deal of consequence had collapsed because of a conduct issue involving the principals. In that world, that information travels faster than print. Claudette Foss read the article on a Tuesday morning over coffee and set her phone down and looked at the window for a long moment. She did not call Derek. She had spoken to him twice since the wedding, once on Monday, as promised, and once on Wednesday, and both conversations had done the work they needed to do without doing the work that was still, in this family, undone. She would host Thanksgiving in 5 weeks. There would be a table. There would be place cards. She was already in some part of her mind considering the seating. She had not called Dahlia. Dahlia had not called her. Dahlia was living in her apartment in Midtown. She had called Otis on the Monday after the wedding. She had called him again on Wednesday. The calls were about practical things, an appointment she had moved, a question about a lease, a recommendation for a dinner place near the Dunwoody MARTA station that he had mentioned and she now wanted to try. They were about practical things and about other things at the same time, in the way that calls between parents and children often are, carrying more weight than their surface suggests. On the Wednesday call, she said, "I want to ask you something." "Go ahead," he said. "The job, what you actually do. Can you tell me more?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you want to know?" "Everything," she said. "Or, not everything right now, but more than I knew last week." "All right," he said. He settled back in his chair. She could hear it in the quality of his voice, the slight shift of a man making room for a longer conversation. He said, "I'll start from the beginning." She said, "I have time." He believed her. He began. And this, too, is where the loose threads remain. Because a conversation between a father and a daughter that starts from the beginning is not a conversation that ends quickly. And it is not a conversation with a clean conclusion. And the things it opens up will take longer than an evening, or a week, or a month to fully inhabit. Otis Laine had kept the shape of himself private for a long time. Not deceptively, but quietly, in the way of a man who has learned that the loudest things about you are rarely the most true. He was beginning, on that Wednesday phone call, to let someone in close enough to see the quieter version. Whether Derek Foss would be part of that future was not yet determined. The wedding was legal. The marriage existed in the records of the county clerk's office in DeKalb County, Georgia. What existed between Dahlia and Derek at that moment was a question that required time and honesty in the particular, unglamorous work of two people deciding whether what they have is worth what it will cost to maintain. The narrator does not know how that ends. Nobody does, yet. What is known is this. Derek Foss did not call Otis Laine. Not on Monday, not in the days after. His attorney sent a brief letter to Ezra Polk on Thursday, citing a desire to explore whether the terms of withdrawal could be reviewed in light of a commitment to address the underlying conflict. Ezra replied on Friday with 3 sentences. The reply was professional and final and left no room for misunderstanding. Senator Floyd Harmon rescheduled the Tuesday meeting twice before quietly allowing it to lapse. He did not make a public statement about anything. His silence was, in the particular economy of Atlanta politics, its own kind of statement. Jasper Wren called Simone Daly on the Thursday following the wedding. He spoke for 40 minutes, on background, about the seating chart and the sequence of events he had been asked to manage, and the instruction he had received from the event hosts. He did not want his name used. Simone agreed to background and noted everything. Crystal Foss sent a text message to an unsaved number on the Sunday following the wedding. The message read, "I don't know if this is the right thing to do, but I wanted to say I'm sorry for my part in it. I don't expect a response." The number belonged to Otis Laine. He read the message that afternoon. He read it twice. He did not respond that day, but several days later, he typed a reply that was brief and direct, and did not perform forgiveness without meaning it. The reply said, "I appreciate you saying that. Let's see where things land." He put the phone down. He was in his kitchen in Stone Mountain, the same house where he had lived for 11 years, the paid-off mortgage that had appeared in Crystal's due diligence as the evidence of modest means, the house with the back porch where he had a chair he sat in on Sunday mornings and read until the light changed. It was a good house. He had never needed anyone to know what it was worth. He made coffee. He stood at the window and looked at the backyard. Late October in Georgia, the grass gone dry, the trees at the edges starting to let go. He thought about a conversation he still needed to finish. He thought about a question Dahlia had asked him years ago on a Savannah waterfront. "What is the most important thing you know?" He had said, "Know exactly what you're worth, and let everybody else catch up." He had not said the rest of it because she had laughed before he got there, and the moment had tilted toward warmth and away from weight. But there was a rest of it. The rest of it was, and be patient while they do. Because most of them will. Not all, but most. He stood at the kitchen window with his coffee and waited for the Sunday morning light to change. Somewhere in the Whitfield Grand Venue's event files, a record existed of the evening's guest list, a printed copy with the seating chart attached, showing table 14 in the northeast corner of the hall, and on it, in the last row, the name Otis Laine. Below that name, in a column labeled Dinner Preference, the word fish. And below that, in the column labeled Notes, a handwritten addition that no one had caught, that read, in Claudette's own neat script, from the Thursday evening when she had revised the layout, moved per host request. That document was in Jasper Wren's files. Jasper had mentioned it to Simone Daly on a background call. She had requested a copy. It had not yet arrived. On a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the wedding, Otis Laine walked into the Caldwell Capital Group offices on Peachtree Street at 8:57 a.m. and took the elevator to the 14th floor and sat at his desk and opened his laptop. His assistant, a capable young man named Aaron, who had worked for him for 2 years and addressed him only as Mr. Laine, set a coffee on the desk and said there were 4 items requiring signature before noon. Otis looked at the 4 items. He signed 3 of them and returned the 4th with a note requesting 1 additional clause before he would sign. He drank his coffee. He looked out the 14th floor window at Peachtree Street below, at the traffic moving in the morning light, at the city doing its ordinary Tuesday things. His phone was on the desk. He picked it up and looked at an email that had arrived at 7:14 p.m. on the Saturday of the wedding. The same evening, he had stood outside the iron gate of the Whitfield Grand Venue in a pale blue shirt. An email he had drafted while standing at that gate and sent before Ezra arrived. The email had arrived in the inbox of the Caldwell Capital Board and had been read by the appropriate parties and had generated the phone calls to Derek's table at the reception that went unanswered, and had set in motion the withdrawal letter that Ezra delivered in person with the quiet precision of a man who has been doing his job for 19 years. The subject line of that email read, Foss Logistics, Investment Committee Recommendation. The body of the email was 6 paragraphs. It was clear and formal, and documented with the precision that Otis Laine brought to everything that required it. It described, without embellishment, what had happened that afternoon. It described the seating chart. It described the RSVP challenge. It described the gate. It described the conversation with Derek at the iron fence, the posture, the instruction to leave. It described all of it in the language of a man who has learned that the most powerful documentation is the kind that does not need to tell you how to feel about what it contains. The last line of the email read, I am recommending withdrawal from this investment on the basis of a material conflict of interest that has become apparent in the conduct of the investee's principal. Full documentation to follow. That was it. No anger in it, no performance, no speech from a gate in October, just a recommendation, documented, sent at 7:14 p.m. from a man who had been standing outside an iron gate for 2 hours in a pale blue shirt, knowing exactly what he was worth. He put the phone down. He looked at the 4th document, the one requiring the additional clause, and began drafting the note to his attorney. The clause was a standard indemnification provision, and the language in the current draft was slightly too broad on the upstream liability exposure, and he had a specific edit in mind that would resolve it without reopening the rest of the negotiation. He wrote the note in 3 sentences. He sent it. He returned the document to his to-do pile and moved to the next item. Outside on Peachtree Street, Atlanta was doing what it does on a Tuesday morning in late October. Moving, building, making its persistent case that things are always in progress. He could see it from the 14th floor, the construction cranes on the north end of the corridor, the commuter traffic still heavy at 9 a.m., the particular light that comes off glass towers when the angle of the sun is still low and everything catches it sideways. He thought about Dahlia's voice on the phone that morning, the way she said his name when she called. Not hello, just his name, the word that had been hers for him since she was old enough to have a word for him. He thought about the Wednesday call coming, the longer conversation, the beginning he had promised to tell her. He was looking forward to it in the specific way he looked forward to things that required him to be present and careful and entirely himself. The morning light came through the 14th floor windows the way it always did, and Otis Laine worked. Otis Laine never raised his voice. He never announced himself. He stood at that gate in a pale blue shirt with a grocery bag and let the room decide what it thought it knew. And then he let the room discover, at its own pace, how wrong it was. People who dismiss others based on what they drive, what they wear, or how they arrive tend to make the same mistake. They assume the question of worth has already been answered. They stop looking. They stop asking. And in that silence, the silence of uncurious certainty, they build their own exposure. The most dangerous person in the room is rarely the loudest one. More often, it is the one who arrived quietly, observed everything, and said nothing until the moment it mattered. Know your value, document what matters, and let everyone else catch up on their own schedule. If this story found the part of you that has ever been underestimated before being understood, hit like and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you never miss a story where patience and precision do what anger never could.